Well, most of the time, contract negotiations for agricultural goods goes reasonably smoothly. However, when there is a problem, it's helpful to know what the rights and liabilities of the parties are. Joining us now to review remedies that the buyer has when the seller breaches a contract is Kansas Farm Bureau Professor of Agricultural Law and Taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, Roger McEowen. Roger, thanks for joining us once again. Now, let's just jump on in. From the buyer's perspective, what rights do they have if the seller breaches a contract?
Well, good morning, Janet. That's a great question. The buyer, of course, can reject goods that don't conform to the contract, and that's a big issue in agriculture because if the nonconformity substantially impairs the contract, that's when the right arises. And we get, with respect to ag goods, we have quality issues, we have color issues. For example, there's a rather famous case involving a New York manufacturer of potato chips, and farmers were supplying potatoes to them, and they had to meet certain color specifications. And the court said, if you don't meet the precise color specification of the buyer, that is a substantial impairment to the contract, and the buyer can reject that contract. So we have to be careful with the quality of agricultural goods, the moisture content, the color content, and those types of things. Those are not necessarily trivial defects.
Now, you mentioned right of rejection. What about the right to cover?
Well, right to cover is also a big issue because if they reject, then what are the damages? And so basically we take the difference between the market price and the contract price of the goods, but at what time does the buyer have to cover, meaning go out and purchase similar goods to fulfill the contract? And sometimes you have to cover as a buyer upon notice of breach, or sometimes you can wait until the time specified for delivery. But keep in mind, with respect to ag goods, that difference in time can mean a great deal in monetary damages because the commodity markets go up and down. And so that's a very important legal issue that people need to make sure they understand how that works.
Now, regarding the right of specific performance, can the buyer obtain possession of the goods by court order, maybe if the goods are unique?
Yeah, that issue depends. And indeed, if the goods are truly unique, then you have to have those goods. And so you don't want monetary damages, you want conveyance of those specific goods. But it really depends on whether the goods are truly unique.
Now, before we wrap, can you also give us an overview of time frame for exercising any remedies?
Well, that's a key important point, too, because it comes down to what's reasonable. And under the law that governs these types of contracts, buyers have a reasonable time to determine whether the goods that they bought are fit for the purpose for which they were purchased, and to then rescind the sale if the goods are unfit. So what is a reasonable time? Well, that depends on all the circumstances. And sometimes the buyer has a right to inspect. Sometimes that is specified in the contract. So, again, it just depends on the particular transaction.
All right. Well, Roger, thank you very much for your time once again and your insight. Kansas Farm Bureau Professor of Agricultural Law and Taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, Roger McEowen, joining us here today.